Well, I've got to say, firstly, that I share Jillian's optimism about this time ahead. Very much like the last group, I felt all of them were optimistic about the bright side of humanity and what technology is going to enable us to do in the future. I particularly found, I don't know Charles Handy personally, but I don't know if you felt like I felt like you know him. One of the best definitions I've ever heard of charisma, and a lot of people get it wrong, it's actually public intimacy. And watching him and listening to him, he just connects with everyone, and he very much shows the bright side of humanity. There are a lot of themes that we've discussed over the last 2 days. I want to confine my thoughts to really, as introductory, 3 basic themes. Number one, the multinational corporation. We had a World Economic Forum session earlier this year in Africa, and almost everything focused on multinational corporations, and that multinational corporations equal jobs. And I went back kind of confused, and I got a couple professors to work on it. I said I was a history major in university, but when did this all start? Because people ate and people earned money before there were multinational corporations. And so I'm going to submit to you, number one, we're getting to the end of this wonderful 400-year run of multinationals. Second theme, happening simultaneously, is the emergence of a culture shift from baby boomers, which really have dominated building multinational corporations, to they skip the, X and all the other generations. It's being turned over right now to millennials. They'll be 75% of the workforce within 10 years. And coincidentally, they don't want a job. 60% of them want their own gig. And the third theme is that digital technology is going to be a fabulous enabler to what they want. Let me drill down just for a minute on each one of those. The digging we did, the first corporation, most everyone will agree, started in England, 17th century, the East India Trading Company. And actually, they had a lot in common with Apple today. They didn't make anything either. And as you know, all Apple does is design and made in Cupertino. All the jobs are elsewhere. It's interesting, but the East India Trading Company didn't produce a lot of jobs. It took 100 years later, in about 1840, when the birth of the industrial age happened, and you had the corporation coming together with the beginning of the industrial age, machines and new sources of power, steam generation, all of a sudden the birth of the factory. And what did it replace? Most were involved in cottage industries, making things by hand. There were merchants that sold it, or they were involved in agricultural. So for 170 years, most everybody has thought if people are going to have money, they must have a job. But that's changing. Interesting. Right now, the largest corporation in the world is worth $750 billion. Apple, they only employ just a little north of 100,000 people. Walmart, more than 2 million people, but they're mostly minimum wage jobs. So it's not solving this. Second point, millennials. Some real key facts on millennials, and we spend a lot of time, because we recruit 3 million people a year, and our workforce is largely independent contractors, and we have to facilitate them. And because our guys are really smart, we focus on a most underutilized resource, women. As a matter of fact, only 3% of our workforce are men, and I don't mind the bias. The bulk of my succession candidates are women, and many of our country presidents are women, in fact. But millennials as women, number one, 58% don't want a job. They want to have their own business. 2, they really care about relationships. If you take an intimacy scale, and on the bottom is Twitter, and you go on up through the various different levels of intimacy, growing intimacy, where face-to-face is warm and hot, and at the top, millennials use all of this technology, but relationships matter to them much more so than it mattered to baby boomers, which were a private generation. They care about causes, give them a purpose. You know, people will work for a living, they'll die for a cause, and that matches millennials today on it. It was interesting when Taylor Swift took on Apple, not for herself, but on behalf of all other recording artists. Within 24 hours, they changed their policy. Millennials, key to the future. Thirdly, how technology will change. I think you're going to see this move from multinational corporations, which replace cottage industries. I submit you may see cottage industry 2.0, me incorporated in the future. And as the last panel discussed the new kind of public workspaces like WeWork, etc., where these individual entrepreneurs, she's already a corporation of one because technology has helped her. Remember when Whitman was still at eBay, and she didn't have an office, she had a cubicle, and we talked about, I said, if you really decided to define your business best at Apple, what do? She said, we facilitate entrepreneurs. And if you'll check it out, 1.6 million people are engaged as sellers on eBay. That's almost as many as Walmart, and I bet they make more in it. Technology facilitated that. We've heard over and over, Uber, this last several days, facilitated that. I submit that if we do this thing right, you're going to find corporations like us that put together a business model that more precisely helps someone succeed at business. 1 out of 5 businesses, or restaurants, for example, failed their first 5 years. But business models matter. You hardly ever see a McDonald's fail. That's what we do. We put together an entrepreneurial model. We microfinance. We give her free training. She gets a free success coach. And then she goes out and builds a business. And when she builds a business, she has confidence, because she succeeds. And when she has confidence and succeeds, she has influence, and then she changes the world. Enough.